Jenna signs a lease on a one-bedroom apartment on a Thursday afternoon. No ceremony, no champagne, just a digital signature and a confirmation email. And 40 minutes later, her cousin Marcus closes on a house 2 states away, shakes hands with a stranger, takes a photo holding a key in front of a door that's now legally his, and posts it online with the caption, "No more paying someone else's mortgage." And that single sentence, repeated by roughly half the homeowners in America at some point in their lives, is one of the most confidently stated financial claims that turns out to be almost completely wrong once you actually run the numbers. I spend way too much time thinking about money, housing, and why the rent versus buy debate is one of the most emotionally loaded arguments in personal finance despite being, underneath all the noise, a fairly simple math problem that almost nobody actually does correctly. So today I'm walking you through the truth that neither the renting is throwing money away, crowd, nor the homeownership is a scam, crowd wants you to hear, because both of them are half right and both of them are leaving out the exact detail that actually decides the outcome. Let's deal with the myth first, because it's the loudest one. The idea that rent is money disappearing into a landlord's pocket while a mortgage payment builds wealth for you. And on the surface that sounds obviously true. Marcus's mortgage payment goes toward a house he owns. Jenna's rent goes toward a house she'll never own a single brick of. But here's what that comparison conveniently ignores. A mortgage payment isn't the true cost of owning a home. It's just the most visible slice of it. And the moment you add in everything else that comes with owning property, the picture changes dramatically. Here's what actually sits underneath that mortgage number: property taxes, which run roughly 1% of a home's value every single year and climb whenever the county reassesses. Homeowners insurance, which has jumped nearly 50% in many parts of the country over the last 5 years as extreme weather claims have piled up. Private mortgage insurance if the down payment was under 20%, which is essentially a monthly penalty fee. And then maintenance, the quiet one everyone underestimates, because the honest rule of thumb is 1 to 2% of the home's value every single year. And that money doesn't arrive as a tidy monthly bill. It arrives as a furnace dying in January or a roof failing during the worst possible month. 4- and 5-figure surprises that are not bad luck. They're a schedule, because roofs last about 20 years, water heaters about 10, and every single one of those has Marcus's name already on it whether he's ready for it or not. Add all of that up, and Marcus isn't really paying his mortgage number every month. He's often paying 30 to 40% more than that number once taxes, insurance, and maintenance are folded in, which means the true monthly cost of owning gets a lot closer to Jenna's rent than either of them realizes standing at their respective signing tables. Now here's where the other side of the argument, the renting is smarter crowd, also gets something wrong, because they love pointing out that Jenna could take the money she's not spending on a down payment and closing costs and invest it instead. And in theory, that's completely true. But in practice, this only works if Jenna actually does it. And this is the single most overlooked variable in the entire debate. The math behind renting only wins if the renter is disciplined enough to invest the difference every single month without fail for years. And the uncomfortable reality is that most renters don't. The money that was supposed to go into an index fund quietly gets absorbed into a slightly nicer apartment, a few extra dinners out, a vacation that felt earned, which is exactly why the average homeowner in this country ends up with a dramatically higher net worth than the average renter. Not because houses are secretly magic wealth machines, but because a mortgage is essentially a forced savings plan, one you're not legally allowed to skip, while an investment account is a savings plan you can quietly stop contributing to the moment life gets a little tight, and nobody sends you a late notice for that. So if you actually want to compare renting and buying honestly, you need a tool that strips out all the emotion. And there's a simple one worth knowing. Take the price of a home, multiply it by 5%, and divide by 12, And that gives you the rough true monthly cost of owning that property once you account for taxes, maintenance, and the opportunity cost of the money tied up in the down payment. If comparable rent in the same area costs less than that number, renting is very likely the better financial move. If rent costs more than that number, buying starts to pull ahead, and running this single calculation on your own address takes about 10 seconds and tells you more than any argument from your uncle at Thanksgiving ever will. Let's talk about leverage for a second, because this is the piece that actually justifies a lot of Marcus's confidence. When he puts down $40,000 on a $400,000 house, he's not just risking $40,000, he's controlling an asset 10 times that size. So if the home appreciates even a modest 4% in a year, that's $16,000 of gains sitting on top of his $40,000 bet, which is a return no brokerage account could legally replicate with that kind of leverage. And this is the one advantage stock market investing genuinely cannot copy, which is exactly why real estate has quietly created more everyday millionaires than the stock market ever has. Not because property is a better investment in isolation, but because the bank's money is doing a huge share of the heavy lifting. But leverage cuts in both directions, and this is the part people conveniently forget during a housing boom. If that same home drops 4% in value, Marcus doesn't just lose 4% of $400,000 proportionally. He loses $16,000 off a $40,000 stake, which is a 40% hit to his actual investment. And unlike a stock, he can't sell off 10% of his house to reduce his exposure. He's fully committed to one illiquid asset in one zip code tied to one local job market, which means if the area's biggest employer leaves town or a hurricane sets up camp over his particular roof, his entire net worth takes the hit at once. There's no diversification cushion whatsoever. There's also a cost of leaving that almost nobody factors into the initial decision. Because if Marcus needs to move in year 3 for a better job across the country, he doesn't just hand back a key like Jenna would at the end of a lease. He has to find a buyer, pay a realtor 5 to 6% of the sale price, cover his own closing costs again, and hope the market cooperates with his timeline. And after all of that, his first few years of building equity often nets him almost nothing once the exit costs are factored in. Because in the earliest years of a 30-year mortgage, the overwhelming majority of every payment goes toward interest, not principal, which means Marcus doesn't actually start owning more of his home than the bank does until somewhere around year 15 to 18. Jenna's version of flexibility is worth real money too, even though it never shows up in a spreadsheet. If a better opportunity opens up in another city, she gives 30 days notice, packs a truck, and she's gone. No realtor, no staging, no waiting for a buyer, no risk of selling into a down market at the exact wrong moment. And that optionality has genuine financial value. It's just invisible until the moment you actually need it, which is precisely why people early in their careers, or people who genuinely don't know where they'll be living in 3 years, are usually better off renting regardless of what the 5% rule says. Because the flexibility is worth more than the math in that specific season of life. Time is the variable that eventually tips this whole debate, because there's a national break-even point, usually somewhere around 5 to 7 years depending on the local market, where the early disadvantages of buying, the closing costs, the slow equity build, the maintenance surprises, get canceled out by the advantages of a frozen mortgage payment while rent keeps climbing roughly 3 to 4% every single year. Stay in a home past that break-even point and the math increasingly favors the buyer. Leave before it, and the renter usually comes out ahead, which means the single most important question in this entire debate isn't which is smarter. It's how long am I actually going to stay? And almost nobody asks themselves that question honestly before signing anything. There's also a tax detail that gets wildly overstated on one side and completely ignored on the other. Mortgage interest is technically deductible, but after the tax code changes a few years back, only around 1 in 10 taxpayers actually itemizes enough to benefit from it. So, For most homeowners, that famous deduction is basically theoretical. But the other tax benefit is very real and rarely mentioned. When Marcus eventually sells the home he's lived in, the first $250,000 of profit, or $500,000 if he's married, is completely tax-free, a benefit Jenna's brokerage account will never get on her gains. And that's a genuine, quiet advantage that compounds the longer he stays in the home. So here's the actual honest answer neither the renting crowd nor the buying crowd wants printed on a bumper sticker. Buying tends to win if you're staying put 7 years or more, if rent in your specific area runs high relative to home prices, or if you know honestly that you're the kind of person who won't actually invest the difference if you rent instead. Because a mortgage will save you from yourself in a way a brokerage account never will, and renting tends to win if you might move within the next few years, if you live somewhere the price-to-rent ratio is genuinely absurd, or if you're disciplined enough to actually invest every single month without fail, because compounding without the friction of taxes, maintenance, and a 5% exit fee adds up to real money over decades. What Marcus and Jenna both missed on their respective signing days is that neither of them ran their own numbers, their own city, their own rent, their own interest rate, their own honest odds of staying put for the next decade. Marcus bought because a headline told him renting was throwing money away, and Jenna rented because a different headline told her homeowners were suckers stuck maintaining a leaky roof. And the truth, the boring, unglamorous truth that never fits neatly into either camp, is that there's no universal winner in this argument. There's only the version of the math that applies to your specific rent, your specific mortgage rate, and your specific plans for the next several years of your life. And the only real mistake either of them could make wasn't choosing wrong. It was never running the numbers honestly in the first place.